I did my homework, I wrote it all out, and I was thinking about, all of the stories, the things that kids say, and this really just begins with my path into becoming a teacher just these past few years. So here it is. In the beginning of 2017-18 school year, I decided I would start to write a daily teaching blog. The title of the blog is more or less an inside joke. It's Quiero ser maestro, 5280. I'm a Denver native, so let me explain. I returned from teaching 3 years in Madrid, Spain, where I taught primary and secondary, and I figured, wow, this teaching gig is super easy. In hindsight, I probably thought this because I taught 3 years in this prominent school in an even more affluent neighborhood in the city center. There was no real issue with behavior ever. The only thing was academics and particularly English language acquisition. And that was really just, in my opinion, the struggle of the entire country at that time. So in the past, I was terribly remiss with my work, but the path that led me to Spain began with studying abroad in Guadalajara. I was in the same class as a very young Ryan Lewis, where I started to take my language learning carefully. Our small but intimate group of Americans would attend our classes in anticipation of the weekend. Many left the city to travel elsewhere in Mexico, and others stayed in the city. I remember this one time when we went to Lucha Libre with one of our instructors. He got so drunk that he fell down a flight of stairs, and the following day in class, he was 45 minutes late, but we all knew why. He came back, he had returned to class, and he looked like he fell down a flight of stairs. And despite this unfortunate detour and fun, our class was still a group enjoying, the virtues of enjoying, the experiences of an education abroad. So back to Madrid, my contract was only 16 hours a week with 3-day weekends the entire school year, all Spanish holidays off, and this was when there was Saint whomever. I was just like, I have the day off. That's great. Free and good health care. I know this personally because I had 2 surgeries in the 3 years I was there, and I paid nothing. And then just a plethora of invites from teachers, staff, and even students to practice their English and enjoy a good meal. A meal there is 2 to 3 hours. Needless to say, my 3 years in Spain solidified the decision to return to the US and become like a for real teacher. And that was what I wanted the blog to essentially be about. I wanted to have a voice and, more importantly, be able to look back and remember how this year of teaching played out. Maybe I'd be able to use this blog to help further my pedagogy in some way, any way that would show progress. Here's an excerpt from one of my first posts. Tomorrow I'll begin the official curriculum for 2017-18 school year. This is my 2nd year here at Stride Preparatory Schools. There are several contributing factors which make this year even more monumental than the normal sentiment surrounding this year. I'm looping with my students, so I'll be seeing them again this 2nd year, and I cannot wait to be back in the classroom. And that's pretty much as far as I got with that blog. Why, you may ask? Because I was pretty much a 2nd-year teacher, and the demands of a teacher in the United States is encumbered with just so many necessities. So by the time I would retire, at home at the end of the day, I was just too tired to write anything substantial, or really even remember. The exhaustion I felt was palpable. It was a mixture of confusion, stress, guilt, even fear. I think I was left with these residual feelings because those first few months are imperative to student behavioral and academic success. So I learned to live with this motto: life really goes on. And I forgave myself for the forgotten, left behind post-its with endless tasks, and I just did my best to persevere. It took me just recently to really live out that motto. In graduate school, it was my first big step towards becoming a for-real teacher after returning from Spain. I did my residency at a dual language school where I literally lived day to day. I received a lot of experience, but as a student teacher, this experience is not really complete. It's finite because you know you have some leeway. This is because along with like your residency hours, you have your graduate work, and then you need to be on campus for school, and that was a big excuse for me. It's like, oh, I'm going to go to school. My year in my residency in 5th grade was insane. I thought at first the other instructors who taught 2nd and 3rd were joking when they warned me that my group that year was difficult. I thought that maybe they were being facetious, just to test me to ensure that this is a life I wanted to live. Working at a dual language school, I was required to teach half the day in English and half in Spanish. The first few weeks of a student teacher, you simply observe. I would do my best to ensure that I understood everything in the Spanish classroom. I figured I lived abroad and that I was prepared enough to be in this professional capacity. I was wrong. There were days with so many instances where I'd reach out to the head teacher and just ask for her lesson. I would then go home and Google Translate what I could not understand. The screen would often become this blurry mess due to lacrimation, the tears of frustration, and a worry that made me doubt myself, which was ultimately a symptom of other issues because underneath it all, I knew that I can do my job because life goes on. And way back then, just a few years ago, the kids loved and lived for correcting my Spanish. I remember one time I was reading Matilda to the kids in Spanish. This was in part due to our dictado, or dictation, which was required daily. I was reading just fine when a few kids started to chuckle, and it reached the point of disruption, and I had this nagging feeling inside. So I stopped and I asked what the issue was. And this action terrified me, this acknowledgement, only because I was constantly observed by my head teacher, the teachers at the university would come in, principal, etc. And then one brave 5th grader finally spoke up and he told me matter-of-factly, it's pelirrojo, not pelirrojo. Those instances diminished as the year went on. The kids often reminded me how strange my accent was. I explained that in Spain, the vernacular pronunciation of language is different because it's a different region. I tried to make them aware that Spanish is spoken in many other countries, and often words and phrases change depending on the region. I can no longer use the verb coger because of these differences. The kids often smirked and giggled at my pronunciation of the Castilian Z's and asked why I lisped. I believe most kids could see the frustration on my face, and I believe this because in a sense, we were all in the same linguistic boat. I was trying to acclimate and adapt my speech for the betterment of teaching. I actually got responses like, you're not speaking the right Spanish to these kids in my university notes. The kids, I imagine, were also acclimating to either English or toward learning formal academic Spanish. There were many moments which I spent in reverie, wondering where I would be if I learned Spanish at a young age, and not spending lots and lots of money traveling abroad and then working abroad learning Spanish. One of the most difficult days in 5th grade happened toward the end of the year. In the English classroom, where we studied English, of course, and social studies. During a social studies lesson on civil rights, one of the most challenging students in graduate school, we call these students the kids we love the most. She exclaimed, and I say exclaimed because this child really only spoke in one voice level. She stated that she needed to leave and repeated this demand until she simply stood up and pushed in her chair to go. The lead teacher was calm and looked over at me. I don't even remember what I was doing. Perhaps I was catching up on lesson planning or my own graduate work. But I felt her stare, so I approached the young girl and asked her why she needed to leave. She completely ignored me and walked around me and headed toward the door. This was the moment where the lead teacher stopped and went in to interrupt this girl by literally blocking the door. She stopped for a moment. Her expression went from mild intensity, and this little girl's expression grew in anger. She demanded to leave the room. The lead teacher remained calm and told her to return to her seat. It was then that this girl began to push the lead teacher. Now, in my year working with this teacher, I didn't know much about her. We didn't develop a close relationship. She was a mother of 4, and she was pregnant. She spent all her free time, lunch, recess, afternoons, planning and grading. She was still calm with this girl as she pushed her. The girl saw that she was getting nowhere with the pushing, so she started to punch the pregnant teacher. She punched her twice before myself or a student asked her to just move aside. The little girl ran out the room, down the hall, and as I went to the phone to call the office, the secretary already stated that she saw the child leave right outside the entrance. The lead teacher did not appear harmed at all by the girl, or she didn't show any signs. Again, I never really saw her emote much over the year. I assume she's been teaching these lessons year after year, and I was simply another student teacher. In the end, we heard that the police, they were called and had to assist alongside the assistant principal in order to get the girl back inside the school. Eventually, weeks later, she was reminded to write an apology note to the teacher. She finally wrote the note. It was one sentence, and it simply stated, "I had to leave." I don't know why, and I don't think anyone ever understood the urgency of this little girl, but her request will live long in my memory. So in retrospect, I now truly understand when teaching very young kids, there's really no definitive way to do so. I know this now because I lived through such amazing and crazy instances. I decided at the end of the year, very recently after I found out I would not receive any letters of recommendation from the school, that perhaps being an elementary teacher is not in the cards for me. I cherish the fact that I got to teach and use Spanish in a professional environment, and perhaps it was then that I began that motto that life really goes on.